Hey boys, welcome back to the ARPG Corner. Today, I'm ashamed to say that we have the most broken bleeding edge build that's currently in the game. So, if you're tired of mowing through the game, super high expedition levels are just too easy for you and you want a challenge and something with some style and flair, this is not the playthrough for you. This is the playthrough to show you how to completely and utterly melt the game in the best, highest DPS possible iteration of this build with the highest survivability that we've had thus far. Now, unfortunately, the changes I've had to make to the build have marginalized Flight of Gavania, and we've had to rely a lot more on Bleeding Edge and Bladestorm to get around and do things. So, this is a build that'll be familiar to those of you who've kind of watched the most broken builds in the game so far. What we're doing is relying essentially on ailments and ailment stacking in order to get insane damage multipliers while still being able to maintain a sword and board setup, which gives us block chance and block efficiency and basically allows us to survive at those higher levels too. So unlike the prior videos, I'm actually going to show you guys absolutely everything about this build and run you through it to the best of my ability before we actually get to an expedition. So without further ado, let's start with the basics. With the basic attribute setups, we've got everything basically pumped into ferocity until we start hitting the diminishing returns close to about 60% crit chance. Everything else goes into toughness. That's it. That's as complex as it needs to get. You can kind of see what's going on here. Even just the flat DPS looks enticing. Okay, so with that said, let's get into the nitty-gritty, the passives. So those of you who've seen the prior builds won't be too shocked by much of what's going on here. We begin by speccing largely into crit chance, because crit builds are the way to go in the present meta, right? So we go all the way up the soldier tree, into assassin, go straight for the highest crit skills, and that pretty much has us handled. So going back into soldier, we grab the 6% move speed, get the rage cost reduction, the 3 seconds rage conservation time, and the 25 rage per hit taken. You'll understand why we do this a little bit later. From here on out, we move into Scholar. Steadfast, we get the rage and all res score. Bit more rage cost reduction and all res score, and then we go into the 150 max willpower and rage. Now, this is where the build begins to deviate a little bit from the prior iterations. We take it further into Adepts. From Adepts, we go into Material Status Ailment Chance score, and we get the 60% Status Ailment Chance score, which is going to really come in handy for us for this build. Okay, to synergize with this, we move into Pain Resistance Program, Max Health and All Res, a bit more Max Health and All Res, and that's all to get into the Kabbalist tree. Now you can see that we've basically specced into the Kabbalist tree so much that we might as well be a spellcaster, but we're not, trust me, we're still a warrior, kind of. So we go all the way up into Immortal Offering. This is basically the build maker combined with a few other skills, so killing an enemy grants 5% damage for each ailment stack on that enemy. Given the amount of ailment stacks we're going to be doing, this is going to be a stupendous damage bonus. So, ailment chance score, and we follow this all the way up into Insidious Decay. The reason we do this is we do more stacks, we do more damage more quickly, and it maxes out our ailment stacks, which is super important for this build. Making our way across, we go into Power of the First Men. Again, more ailment stacks, grab all of this. Make your way across and grab the +1 additional ailments. Again, that's another build maker for this. Now I've rotated the outside ring so that Time Weaver is on this side. From Time Weaver, we follow our way down. These skills aren't really applicable to us, but we have to kind of stomach it in order to get the 5 extra ailment stacks. Dire Juncture is absolutely pivotal in the higher expedition levels to stop you from getting one-shotted. So even if they get through your block, if they get through your all resist, the damage will be staggered to a point where you won't die immediately. You'll get a second of grace time where you can actually heal yourself or life leech so you just don't drop dead. Another 5 ailment stacks for a total of 30 ailment stacks max. Now, this is me trying something out which time cannot heal. I haven't actually felt a lot of DPS increase from this. I don't believe that the 100% hit damage gain that you get after a second and a half is factors in the critical hit multiplier. So I think it's just a plain plebby hit that's completely useless for us. So that's 2 points you can possibly ditch for the time being. But for the time being, I have it in there just to try it out, basically. Now, making our way across to the Warmonger tree, we go down into Bestial Frenzy, just flat damage increase basically because there's always enemies around us. Pick up the ferocity. If you don't have any life leech, pick up feast for the crows. I have 5% on my item, which is more than enough for this build, so I can save a point there. Make our way across. This is super important. Manic slaughter and appetite for bloodshed. This allows us to maintain our rage at a high level, which is very, very critical for this build. Making our way down further into the ranger tree, we grab persistence hunting, 25% damage to enemies with impaired movement. This is basically a flat 25% damage because we'll be doing stasis and we'll be doing stun and we'll be freezing. So basically enemies are just going to cop this extra damage all the time. Now into the Abyssal Shaper. This is what makes the infinite rage regeneration work, right? So kind of ditch a few points in here. The occult status ailment chance kind of helps us a little bit. And we go into Fatal Pact. Basically, whenever you add an ailment stack to an enemy, you gain that stack yourself, which means that you're constantly taking damage. So if you remember, we've got 25 rage per hit taken down here, which means that every single time that a tick goes off, and we'll have multiple ailments going off on us, we're getting 25 rage. Now, this actually combines with another skill that we take further on in Child of Fury, which is another 10 rage per hit taken. So that's 35 rage per tick, and we're having multiple ticks a second. So that's what allows our rage to self-sustain. So speaking of this tree, we make our way around through Kabbalist into Assassin, into Child of Fury, follow it up here, and this is another build maker, right? Furious Appetite allows you to passively generate rage. Absolute no-brainer for any warrior class. And the one that makes it all work, skills have 100% rage cost when rage is over 750, but skills cast at this increased cost deal double damage. What that means is 2 times your DPS, almost all the time. Excellent. Now, last little thing, we go up into Praetorian. Now that we're sword and board, we can afford to get up here, get some extra block chance, and get some block efficiency. From there, we go down into Sacred Oath. This is super important because it applies weakness stacks, right? So the whole idea behind this build is that we're applying as many different damage types as humanly possible, right? So you can see with Bleeding Edge, I'm applying Freeze and Bleed. With Flight of Gavanir, I'm applying Shock and Stasis. With Bladestorm, I'm applying Shock and Stasis. So the more you mix and match different ailment types, the higher your damage multiplier ends up being. So your ailments are effectively everything for this build. You can see, funnily enough, I've only got 46,000 HP, which isn't a lot, but for a build with this much defensive capability, it's not really all that bad. So I haven't maximized block chance, but you can with this build quite easily. So I've got 88.5 and 24 block efficiency. If you decide to drop some DPS for extra defense, you can easily get it. You can easily be Immortal. I just prefer to have a slightly higher clear speed. That's just my personal preference. So I'll take you guys through the gearing for this. So I've got a nice legendary one-handed axe. I've stacked ether damage on it to ensure that I do stasis effects on enemies for, you know, the aforementioned reasons in the passive trees. We've got a lot of multipliers off of that. You can look through the stats yourself. I won't really go over every single one of them. Just flat damage on this, bit more status ailment chance score and move speed, of course, something that's very near and dear to my heart. Nothing crazy with the pants. And the shield, of course, is just, I'm trying to maximize block chance as much as humanly possible. All res, block chance, health, you know, all that stuff that keeps you alive. Same with the chest piece, trying to maximize block chance using gems. The rest is all DPS oriented stuff. So this isn't min-max stuff. This is just found gear that I use. Nothing particularly insane about it. I'm trying to maximize crit damage and crit chance because it's a crit build, obviously, and flat damage as much as possible. Now, one thing I would recommend going for in your shoulder pieces and possibly arms if you can, is the rage and willpower cost reduction. This really comes in handy for a build that's casting as much as we are. And I've just got the 29 and the 26%. That combined with the passive skill tree and the self-regenerating ailments tends to work for me most of the time. If it doesn't, I would pick it up on the gauntlets as well, and there's a bunch of other things we can do in the passive skill trees, such as make our way across to Duty to Exterminate, increases the pool by 200, you can grab another 400 in total there if you're really having trouble with the rage. Okay, that was a mouthful. Now, moving on to the skills. So I've got to say, Sovereign Shout is not one I use all that much anymore. I'll use it sometimes to pre-buff myself, primarily for the movement speed boost, right? So I'll buff myself, then I'll use Bladestorm to move around. It's strictly a mobility thing, right? So increased duration of the buffs granted by this skill, more to all res, more to block chance, rage generation on hit, which I think that doesn't affect us, but I think the rage generation per enemy hit by the shout does. So sometimes when you're surrounded by enemies and you find yourself out of resource and out of potion, you can slam that as an emergency button. Life leech, who doesn't like life leech? Increases effectiveness of all buffs, no brainer. And of course the movement speed buff, which we love so much. Now, moving on to our main, I'm ashamed to say, damage dealer, Bleeding Edge. This will get nerfed, so enjoy it while it lasts. We go for increased area of effect. We're trying to do as much AoE as possible. Axe continues to spin after being thrown, and the thing that allows the build to function, alright? You have to spec this for this build, you must. Despotic Perseverance increases damage per ailment stack. So, as you can imagine, the more ailments you apply, the higher the damage multiplier. It's so synergistic, it's almost disgusting. And we've got Astral Orbit. The axe now follows you as you move. You don't have to do this. You can literally cast it to the cursor. You can be a completely ranged build if you want. It doesn't have to follow you around. I just find it much easier to kind of kill and move, clear speeds increase, and I'm all about the clear speeds at the moment. So moving down to Wings of Ishmir. Increases flight speed, increases rage generation, that's basically what we're using it for. Grants a buff for each enemy hit, nice DPS bonus. Increases crit chance, which is, I suppose, nice for this skill, but I don't particularly care whether the skill crits or not. I can really just, I can take it or leave it, you know? But, you know, none of the other ones are fantastic. I would say maybe I would do status ailments. Status ailments is primarily what I'm looking for in this. And if you have the points for it, I'm trying to see if I actually can, right? So a lot of people use Relentless Pursuit here because it costs stamina points rather than rage. So it doesn't cost much rage anyway, but if you're trying to use it as a rage generator, taking from the stamina pool is probably the wiser thing to do. I've got it inflicting stun on impact because that synergizes with the impaired movement flat bonus we have going on as well. Not to mention that the enemies stop attacking you for a little while, gives you a nice little break to cast Bleeding Edge. And if you actually unspec some of these, depending on what you want or what you don't want, I would do the Vortex before landing that pulls enemies in, because that will bring them into you, you cast Bleeding Edge, everyone's dead, you know, rinse and repeat. Now, our old damage dealer, our old trusty damage dealer. I'm gonna try and do a build around this down the track once this one gets nerfed, but currently Bleeding Edge is just too darn good for, you know, the aforementioned reasons. So, Flight of Gavnir we're primarily using to apply status ailments to people. So we've got Thunderous Impact for the damage, Chronic Suffering for the ailment chance score, launch 2 hammers instead of 1, absolute no-brainer. The random damage type thing actually applies to you as well as your allies, which is why I use it. It's basically a flat damage boost. And then we've got increased crit chance based on block chance. This is what allows, to those who haven't followed the build in the past, this is what allows it to have 100% crit chance at all times. So this is probably the second most broken skill in the game next to Bleeding Edge as far as I'm aware. And it's why I want to make a build around it, assuming that they don't nerf this skill into the ground, which they probably should. Increased crit damage, again, and grants a movement speed buff. That's just because I really like movement speed. So Blood for Blood. It's something I can kind of take or leave, but, you know, it helps us explode people, do more AoE. So increased damage on enemies suffering from damage over time. Damaging area of effect follows the target. Chance that enemies will explode. I like that one a lot. We've got increases attack and spell speed. The reason I use this, it won't affect our DPS. It allows me to cast Bleeding Edge and all the other stuff a lot more quickly. So that's kind of why I use that. Increases chance to inflict ailments, no-brainer for us, right? Increases duration, no-brainer. And chance to frenzy enemies. I was just experimenting with that. I don't really know. I mean, I can take or leave so many of these. Probably do the reduced movement speed for enemies. We can try that for this run. I really don't mind. Health regen, doesn't really matter. We're leeching so much that it's all good. Increased area of effect. If you're playing with your friends, you probably want to use this one because you can get it to probably cover like half the screen, if not the entire screen. Okay, and lucky last, our mobility skill, right? Blade Storm. Increases rage generation from enemies killed by this skill, no-brainer. Reduces rage cost, no-brainer. Can be held to prolong the duration of this skill, absolutely necessary for the way that we use this skill for mobility. Increases damage per each ailment an enemy has, you might remember that from Bleeding Edge. yes, you kind of can break Bladestorm. If you're running through lower level expeditions or like main campaign content, if you combine this with this build, you can probably just get through the entire campaign just right-clicking and holding right-click. It's hilarious. Increases damage, no-brainer yet again, and increases to crate upon inflicting a crit hit. Now, I haven't found this really increasing it a lot, if at all. I don't know if it's bugged or not, but I'm just trying it out. The other one you can try is crit hits have a chance to smite enemies with a bouncing attack, and all kinds of other things. Really depends on what your preferred playstyle is. Excellent. Good. Now, I believe that has covered just about everything. I'm sure if I haven't, you guys will let me know in the comments and I'll kick myself after the fact. So, 139. That's where we're at. Sword and board, level 139. Let's do it. I feel like I'm cheating on my two-handed sword. It's been such a nice arrangement up until this point, you know. Yet here we are, sword and board, like every other pleb. Alright, so the first thing you'll probably notice is it takes a bit longer to spool up the damage with this build. It doesn't clear as quickly as the pure flat damage stuff, but it scales so much higher, right? So nothing there even flustered us. The problem as always that I seem to run into is just the rage generation isn't as fantastic as I may like.
Bigger they are, the harder they fall.
And I guess I'm not quite used to this slower clearance speed, but that being said, we are in level 139. I mean, we've kind of left the low level stuff behind here. So I probably should be satisfied with this. That is to say that this is by no means a finished build. You guys can tweak this to your heart's content. You can throw away the sword and board, you can pick up a two-hander. As long as you're mixing and matching different ailment types, that's the important thing, right? So you can see the 4 different ailments for Immortal offering down in the bottom left there. I just moused over them. Right, oh, we're doing fire damage as well. Hells yeah, right? So whenever this is up, our DPS shoots up to about 27k, give or take. I wonder if I can get a bit more of that fire damage going on, right? So there's room to move even for me. The more of that you apply, the more exponentially crazy your damage gets with this build. You can see that stun chance really helping us from Wings of Ishmir. Not only does it apply extra damage to the enemies, but we stop them from attacking us for a brief second, which is very, very helpful. So I think I like it. I think it's good. It's a lot more survivable than the two-hander build was. It doesn't clear the low-level content quite as fast, but it will clear the high-level content a lot more reliably. And again, if you find yourself dying with this build, hey, legendary, thank you game, appreciate you. Okay, and yeah, if you find yourself dying, let's see what we got. I'm kind of excited. Cult damage. It's always your cult damage. It's like, what do they think I'm doing here? So, you know, if you hadn't realized by now, this is going to get nerfed. There's no chance in hell this is going to sustain. The next patch is going to just pummel this into the ground. So just enjoy it while it lasts. Try and use this opportunity to get as many levels as you can, get as high up on the expeditions as you can, and then after that we can actually get to the task of making normal builds that aren't just cheese, you know? And as much as I enjoy the old cheese, it's like we're all doing the same thing now. Like the whole idea of a skill tree like Wolcen's is that, you know, there's diversity. You're supposed to be able to play this in which way you want. And I actually spent an entire day trying to craft an infinity. Oh my god,
that looks powerful.
This is why we farm the higher levels, guys. This is what we want. So the infinity blades, TLDR, they kind of suck. You know, they're okay. But compared to this, compared to what you're seeing, like the synergy of movement and being a blender and just annihilating everything in front of you, they can't compete. They just, you can't move and kill, you can't do this kind of DPS, and the thing is you're beholden to a similar kind of build setup as this. Because they need ailments, they need to detonate ailments in order to actually do any kind of damage. Which, you know, I get it. The game likes that sort of thing right now. That's the meta. But it would be nice to see the Infinity Blades get some kind of a buff in the next patch, just to actually make them competitive. It's a really cool build. Makes you feel like a Dark Templar to all those of you who know the old StarCraft. As you can see, it's taken me a little bit longer to clear through the contents. I haven't really spawned the bosses quickly as I may usually like. I've got to say the mobs have been very disparate on this level spawn. Hasn't really been phenomenal. The density is not as I would normally like it. You get some pretty major crits. With the two-hander, I was doing, you know, in excess of 6 million at points. So you can put out some damage. It's no joke. Alright, so the boss is up. Let's get to it. Buff our movement speed, get the Blade Storm on. I've got to say, I've had to sacrifice a bit more movement speed to make this build work than I would usually like. I really like getting around and just killing. I really like the spin to win barb in that one season of Diablo where you were just kind of spinning and tornadoes were going everywhere and you were clearing rifts in basically like a minute or two. It's great. I think that's where the joy in these kind of games really lies, being OP yet being mobile, just feeling like you can do anything. I really hate the slow and steady builds. There's just something a little bit boring and banal about playing them. Alright, so we'll see how we get through the boss here.
Can't manage that right now.
Indeed. So as you can see, quite steady, but we're having to use a little bit more strategy than we did back when we just kind of threw the hammers at the guy and one-shot him. So I'm hoping in a couple of levels I can combine a few projectile skills here. So as you can see, I'm only level 75 because the XP gains slow down so much in this game when you get to this point. When I get a few more levels, I'm hoping to spec back into the extra projectile, Archeon's teachings, a bit more extra projectile crit damage, and then eventually start making my way into something to make the hammers a little bit more useful again. Because, you know, it's kind of boring just watching this fly around all day. I kind of hope they nerf this thing. It's almost too good. So, with that all said, I hope I covered everything to the best of everyone's satisfaction. This is the time where I remind you, if you're interested in build videos, hit the subscribe button, hit like. If you don't like me, smash the dislike twice. Let's stick with this. I'm kind of curious to follow the patches to see where the meta goes, and I'll do my very best to cover it with you guys. So until next time, see yous.